Divas, welcome. Hello from a winter wonderland here at the Lafayette Park Bureau. I am looking right now as I record this on Thursday morning, January 23rd, at a snowman in my backyard from yesterday's historic snowfall. Yes. And today's special guest, Florida Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Wilton Simpson, will talk about the impact of this winter storm on the state's ag community and so much more. My friends, you want to listen to what Commissioner Simpson has to say about President Trump, immigration, a reshuffle of the Florida cabinet, and so much more. Please join us, Florida Ag Commissioner Wilton Simpson.
These are Americans that are suffering, Americans that are dying, Americans that are losing everything they've got in these fires. And it's really a dereliction of leadership in California. It should be a crime to not manage their forests.
You're listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Let's dive in.
Divas, we've got a really special show for you today. I want to welcome back to Deeper Dive, Florida Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Wilton Simpson, frequent guest of the show or friend of the show. Welcome back, Commissioner.
Well, thank you for having me, Dara.
Thank you for joining me. We have a lot to talk about. I'm here in Tallahassee at the Lafayette Park Bureau at my home, looking at the snowman across the street and footprints in the snow in my backyard. I think we need to start talking by this historic winter storm. Of course, by the time this runs on Sunday, the snow might be all gone, but you're the agriculture commissioner. Maybe you can give us a quick update on how the storm has impacted crops and other things that you're doing over there.
Sure. Well, every so many years, and I hope it's about 50 or so, we have one of these types of winter storms. And not this type of winter storm, because this is setting records in snowfall, right? I think the previous record in Milton, Florida, I think they said yesterday on TV, was like 4 inches of snow. They've received over 8 inches in this storm. So
yeah, my friend, and excuse me for interrupting, but that's how I roll. My friend in Milton actually sent me the tape measure in the snow in his yard, and it was a little over 8 inches.
It's amazing because in Florida, we always think about we're going to prepare for hurricanes, right? We're going to prepare for lots of wind. Thunderstorms bring lots of wind, lots of rain, perhaps. But we do not think of building structures in Florida that will handle the snowfall.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in agriculture today, there's multiple areas of agriculture being affected, obviously, by the snow. One of the biggest ones are nurseries, right? The cloths that is put around a frame cannot hold up the weight of this much snow. So it's destroying a lot of our nurseries.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that's a big issue. Greenhouses, when you think about our trees that are exposed to the environment, like our satsumas, the citrus and fruit trees that are exposed. Initially, obviously the snow and ice may damage the fruit, but if it sits there too long, it will eventually damage that tree. And so I think we're probably going to have, some citrus damage that's up north. And then, of course, we have cattle that rely on oats and other forage that is being grown in North Florida. And a lot of that's going to be destroyed. And so we're going to have to bring that from other areas of the country or other areas of the state, hopefully first, but then obviously other areas of the country. So between our cattle industry, citrus industry, nursery industry, at a minimum, those are going to be greatly affected by this much snow. And it's something we're going to have to, over the coming days, do an assessment and see what type of resources we can bring to bear, for helping these farmers.
It's really something I never thought of until yesterday, when my neighbor has one of those, like a tarp over his driveway to cover his vintage Corvette. And that collapsed on the Corvette. A friend of mine was telling me about the screens around swimming pools. Those have been collapsing up here. I hadn't thought of it. That can do damage to the pools. But right, the nurseries, with the greenhouses and the cloth covers are not designed to withstand the weight of snow, which then becomes actually, I don't know if it gets heavier because once it melts and then it turns into ice, the water accumulates and it gets heavier. I know it's very soon. And as I said, the snow is still on the ground, at least here. Do you have a back of the napkin quick estimate on what you think the damage would be from this?
Well, we've been coordinating with organizations like Farm Bureau and the University of Florida, the IFA system, and we will be getting much more accurate information. By the middle of next week, we'll probably have a very accurate assessment of the damage. It will be in the, tens of millions of dollars, I would suspect. I do not expect it to be, 100 million or something like that, but it'll be well within the tens of millions and maybe up to $100 million at this early assessment. But again, I'm just, like you said, this is a back of the napkin. What do we think? But the reality is what you mentioned about the pool screens is very true. The weight of that snow will be on that pool screen. And then when it turns to ice, it's even heavier and it's just going to push through it. And so that's the same thing that's happening with these farming structures that are just not meant to be designed for having that much weight. In Georgia, even where they get a lot of snow and then you go further north, you have to completely design the roof systems different on homes and buildings for this type of event. In Florida, this is just not something that clearly we are used to seeing, and it's something that we're not prepared for to be able to manage and handle when you have that type of snowfall, where literally, this is obviously record snowfall, but even in, every 50 years or so, when you have a small snow event, a half an inch to an inch or a trace of snow, it's not going to do this type of damage. So this is one more challenge when you look at it from the hurricanes that we've had.
I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, farmers, we've had one challenge after the next with hurricanes, with our forests, with our crops, with our flooding. Now we've had somewhat of a dry spell in North Florida over the last 3 or 4 months. And so I think a little rain would have been helpful. But clearly, as we go into fire season, by the way, with this snow on the ground, it will melt, obviously, moisten things up. So it will help with the fire season. But this is certainly not the way we wanted to receive moisture this year in North Florida.
I'm not laughing at the situation because it seems like it's quite dire for many farmers and agriculturalists and nursery men and women. You mentioned fires, and I've covered every type of natural disaster, I believe, except for a tsunami. I have not covered tsunami. And one of my best friend's son and his family lives in Altadena, and they had to evacuate. So these forest fires that we're seeing in California, of course, that's a different kind of climate out there. But forest fires, to me, are the scariest kind of natural disaster. Do you have predictions for what kind of forest fire season we're expected to see this year?
We prepare every year in Florida for what could be a disastrous season. And let me give you some examples. I really love talking about our forestry department of the Florida Forest Service. Rick Dolan's doing a tremendous job. In the last 2 years, since I've been elected to Commissioner of Agriculture, we've been blessed by the legislature. We've spent over $100 million on equipment. So we went from Vietnam era Hueys to now we have our own state helicopters that are there to fight fires. We've brought in additional technology like drones to be able to get to a fire quicker, to be able to assess a fire, to be able to help people on the ground put them out much quicker because we can respond quicker. We've bought dozers, many new dozers to replace dozers that were an average age of probably 20 years old. A lot of the dozers we're replacing are just not reliable because we were not getting the resources we needed to be able to replace those dozers in a timely fashion. So we're very proud of the fact that we've got new equipment. Now, what have we done with it last 2 years? Last year, we had a record burn on state forests of 285,000 acres of property. The previous administration, before I got there, I think average burned somewhere between 150 and 60,000 acres because it was not something that was important. But those controlled burns, those prescribed burns, is what allows us to put these fires out much quicker. The ones we know that are going to come, whether it's through arson, whether it's through lightning strikes, or whatever the source is, backyard fire get out of control, we can put them out much quicker because of our prescribed burn program. And it is our policy to burn anytime it's safe. And this is the time of year we would be prescribed burning anytime it's safe, we are prescribed burning. And so I think it's very important for the state of Florida to know that your Department of Agriculture is working very hard to do our prescribed burns. In total this year, there'll be over 2 million acres burnt, which is something that we hit about every year when you consider all organizations, where it's the federal government, your local basin boards. We work with DEP, local governments. And I think it's very important to keep that prescribed burn up, because that is one of the major tools in the toolbox to prevent the California style fire.
Right.
And it's really a tragedy of leadership in California. These are Americans that are suffering, Americans that are dying, Americans that are, losing everything they've got in these fires. And it's really a dereliction of leadership in California. It should be a crime to not manage their forests, not manage their territory. And they say, well, but we've got, mountainous terrain and we've got 70-mile-an-hour winds. Yeah, in Florida, we know there are going to be thunderstorms. We know there are going to be hurricanes. We know all this stuff, just like they know all of those facts. You have to prepare for the facts on the ground, not for what you hope happens, but for what you know is inevitable to happen. And it's a real crime against the citizens of California. They have such inept leadership.
There's a little jab at Gavin Newsom. It's really tragic to watch and hear stories, like personal stories of the loss that people are suffering, not only lives, but communities and, neighborhoods and livelihoods. I think that fires are just so frightening because you don't know when they're going to end. Trees look like they are stable and fine, but their root system is completely destroyed and they can just fall over. And, the mitigation post fire is intense.
And just to be clear, Dara, we get complaints here when we do our prescribed burns.
I know.
It's understandable, right? It's understandable.
It was quite controversial because I remember the controversies 20, 30 years ago about prescribed burns.
Yep. And we could take the position that, people may complain and so we can't do them. And we would be in the exact same position they are. As leaders, you cannot take public safety, the restoration of your forests, the land that your animals traverse the state on, that wildlife corridor, all of the things. You cannot take that for granted in the state. And you certainly can't excuse it away by saying, well, some people may be upset if we control burn. When we control burn, we not only are restoring our forests and we're not only reclaiming those areas, but we are protecting life first and property of the citizens of the state of Florida. That's what this exercise is all about. And so, we're going to continue to do that. I've got 2 more years as Commissioner of Agriculture. We certainly are going to be very aggressive the next 2 years, because even with all the efforts that we do to preserve our forests, to prescribe burn, to make sure we don't have the big one, Mother Nature sometimes has other things in store. But because we're very well prepared, we are certainly not thinking we're going to have the big fire, but even doing everything right, you can still have a massive fire in the state that could obviously, where we could have loss of life and property. That's what we get up every day thinking, how do we prevent that? And you prevent that not only through the prescribed burn program, but we have specialized equipment to cut fire lines. We have, obviously, I mentioned to you earlier with the drones, we can get there earlier. We have helicopters to help fight fires now. We have the tools in the toolbox, if we respond quickly, to hopefully not allow one of those fires to get out of hand, as they have done out west. And again, our hearts bleed for the citizens of California. These are Americans that are not only dying out there, but suffering all the losses of all their personal properties and all of the things. And it's a real tragedy. And by the way, it's a tragedy of leadership, because generally, under Gavin Newsom's leadership, and I'm not trying to be political, but the fact of the matter is it's an uber liberal set of policies and an uber liberal state. And they do not believe in doing the right thing to prevent these types of accidents occurring.
And we will be right back with Florida Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Wilton Simpson. The news in haikus. This week's news in haikus came from Paul Fleming. He is the director of the Florida Supreme Court's Office of Public Information. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the Florida Supreme Court's oral arguments can be seen anywhere around the world on the Florida channel or on the court's own Gavel to Gavel or YouTube channels. Also, while we're on the Supreme Court, I might just say a shout out to one of my favorite divas, that is Justice John Coriel. I hope you're listening this week. Oral argument. Take heed. You may learn something if you will listen. Don't forget, we'd love to hear your haiku. You can slide them into my DMs or you can send them to podcasts, that's podcasts with an S, at e.newsserviceflorida.com. Wherever you're listening, please don't forget to subscribe and give us a rating if you like what we're doing. We are back with Wilton Simpson, the Agriculture Commissioner for the great state of Florida. I wanted to ask you about avian flu. We're talking about agriculture and the impacts on agriculture and some of the things that our farmers and others are coping with. Can you give us an update on avian flu and what the state is doing to address that, if anything?
Sure. This is another case of trying to be prepared so that we do not add to the misery of the rest of the country's problems with avian flu. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So avian flu, and I may have the timing of this off, but probably 6 months ago, there were a couple of dairies in Texas that broke with the avian flu, dairy cattle. I issued an emergency order on the day of the break or the day after the outbreak of AI in dairy cattle that no lactating cattle from Texas could come into the state of Florida without being tested. And we shut that down to protect our dairy industry in the state of Florida. Not only protect our dairy industry, but those birds, once dairies have avian flu on them, then birds can migrate from a dairy to a farm, a chicken farm, whether it's meat or eggs. And then you would have to depopulate that entire farm.
You mean kill all the chickens, right?
That's exactly what they're going to, right. The avian flu is going to kill them all. So you have to, when we say depopulate, we're getting ahead of the fact that the avian flu is going to kill them all.
Right.
And so it's 100% depopulation. And so when you think about protecting any type of bird industry in this state, any type of dairy industry in our state, that's something at the department we clearly try to have the most safe, affordable, and abundant food supply in this state. The agriculture today, as we're talking on this show, over 2 million people are going to work today in agriculture. It's the second leading driver of the economy. And more than 70% of all the vegetables on the eastern seaboard of the United States are being grown here in the state of Florida today.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that again? Because I think a lot of Floridians don't know that.
I'll try to get that right again. So first of all, over 2 million people today are going to work in agriculture, over $200 billion of economic output annually. Our goal is to have the most safe, affordable, abundant food. And this is such a large part of our economy. And what we're trying to do is not only protect our way of life and our economy, but protect our food supply.
And 70% of the nation.
70% of the eastern seaboard of the United States food is being produced today in Florida.
Okay, and you're welcome. New York and New Jersey, you're welcome.
You're welcome. And by the way, we really promote our Fresh from Florida products. If you go to the store, if you're listening and you go to your store, please buy Fresh from Florida products. If you want green space in this state, we all, have this notion that development's going too fast. We're the free state of Florida, over 1,000 people a day are still coming. If you want to maintain green space in this state, support your local farmers. Buy that Fresh from Florida product, because where our green space substantially comes from is your farming community.
I 100% endorse that, and I do that, and I've spoken about what I do personally with Chef Justin about I'm part of a co-op, and we buy online weekly from local producers, and that's where I get a lot of my produce and actually chicken and eggs and stuff too.
Well, we all love our green space. We all love our wildlife corridor. The best way to support those ideas is to buy your local farmers' products. And again, we have a major program called Fresh from Florida. You can go to the website and find out where to buy these products and who has them. If you shop on a handheld device as you go in the store, it's going to identify those products. And so we're very proud of those things. And we need to support our farming communities. And again, when a tragedy like what is happening today in North Florida with all the snow and ice come along, we will have a program that will help our farmers get back on their feet. But the reality is the Farm Bill at a federal level has not been passed now in 7 years. And that's what the real tragedy is we do not have a partner or have not had a partner in Washington. I think you're going to see a major turnaround coming with President Trump's being sworn in his leadership. So we're very hopeful in the coming months that we'll have a farm bill passed, and that's really going to help get our farmers back on their feet.
Well, you did what I love when my guests do this, and you segued right into the next section of the show. And what is your big takeaway from the 2024 elections, other than that people were really angry about the price of eggs? What do you think the lessons were learned from 2024?
The lessons are learned that the pendulum, that is the pendulum of politics, can swing very rapidly and can swing way too far. And I think in this country, under President Biden's leadership or someone's leadership, and I don't mean this nastily, I think President Biden was absent a lot during the last 4 years. But the reality is that his policies led to a uber inflation. Now, I'm old enough to remember the Jimmy Carter days and the uber inflation that we had there, and the misery index, as Ronald Reagan called it. And I think we were just living under a misery index of many issues. Inflation was a big issue, a misery index of people flooding across our border, misery index of lawfare. People could see the difference in, I often say this, that they tried to not only put President Trump in jail. What a tragedy that is. Nobody's above the law. And then on Biden's way out, he pardons all of his family members because he said the justice system may go after his family members. What they said about President Trump, well, if he's got nothing to hide, he doesn't have anything to worry about, or if he hasn't broken the law. And no matter what if you're a Republican or independent or Democrat, what they were charging President Trump with were not laws that he had broken, number one. Number two, that any elected official, almost any business person in this country, could be charged with something similar. So the scary part of this is that President Trump had the stamina and the prestige and the ability to overcome lawfare against him. He had the ability to do that because he's probably known by 90% of Americans, and they could see that this was a sham. But in a liberal jurisdiction, he was still convicted. And I just can't imagine the rest of us private citizens, if we were put under that same pressure, we would have probably had to have taken a plea deal, right? We'd have had to have done something to have just gotten them away from us. So unfortunately, in these real liberal jurisdictions, using lawfare against your political leaders, and I can't stress this enough, Dara, is that we do not do that in the United States of America. I remember when Hillary was running for president and everybody had to chant, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. No one ever tried to prosecute her and lock her up. Now, everybody kind of thought it was funny that, with the chant of lock her up and the liberals decried it and like, oh my God, they would try to lock her up. Nobody actually brought charges against her and tried to put her in jail. They actually brought multiple jurisdictions against President Trump. So I'm proud that he's overcome the lawfare, and I'm very proud that he even said in his inauguration that we're not going to stand for this. This is not what these were for. We're going to clean house here. So when you think about the optimism, I was talking to a friend the other day, and we talked about the optimism that's come back into the country because we feel like we know we've got a strong leader here. We know who's in charge today. It's not, President Trump's already done more. He's already talked to reporters in the last couple of days more than Biden did in the last year, right? And so we know who's in charge now. There's a sense of optimism in the country. In 1984, I was able to vote for the first time in my life. I turned 18. President Reagan, I voted for him. And there was a sense of optimism in the country after he was elected to clean up Jimmy Carter's mess era. And so this sense of optimism that I think today that's in the economy, that's in the idea that we're going to shut the border down, that we're not going to use lawfare to try to put our opponents in jail. And so I think there's a real optimism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at, the outgoing administration and Biden to pardon all of his family members and the committee members and things of that nature is pathetic. It shows how guilty they must feel about the things they've done in their lives to think that a prosecutor now may go after some of those folks like they did President Trump. They're like, oh, President Trump will go after him.
Or fear.
Like
I'm going to push back a little on that.
Please.
Because they could be fearful because there have been statements made by President Trump and his some of his folks in his sphere, his aides, about prosecuting President Biden and his children.
Hey, Dara,
and yes,
this is good. So there's fear that they may prosecute the guilty members of Biden family, right? There's fear of that because it's true.
I'm not saying they're acknowledging guilt. I'm not saying
4 years earlier, this is important.
Mm-hmm.
4 years earlier, Trump didn't pardon all of his family members.
Mm-hmm.
Trump didn't pardon all of his friends around him and people that were on controversial committees. He left them exposed to the real legal system that's supposed to be here in the United States. Trump didn't do these tactics on his way out last time, and he could have, but he didn't because those people were not guilty. And then the Biden administration weaponized our judicial system to go after all of these people. And if Trump had 4 years ago said, hey, you know what, I better pardon everybody because they may go after them, you're taking justice out of the hands of a judiciary that's supposed to be blind. So now they're saying, because we have done this to President Trump, because we've done this to his family, because we've done it to him and his friends, we better pardon all of ours because they may return the favor.
I see what you're saying. You're saying it's an acknowledgement of that the judicial system can be used to penalize your foes.
That's exactly right. The bottom line is what Biden is saying he fears, what his people are saying they fear, is exactly, and this is what liberals do, it's exactly what they did to President Trump. Mm-hmm. They ran the playbook on this. Mm-hmm. This had never been done in another era of our history of our country, not in recent era.
Well, let me ask you.
So this was the first time it's been weaponized like this.
Let me ask you about the pardons of the January 6th protesters, some of whom were violent. Got long sentences. There was a blanket pardon for all those folks who were involved in that. What are your thoughts on that?
What I thought I thought several things on this, Dara, and this is a longer story perhaps, but the reality is we have turned politics into what we're willing to accept. And I'll give you an example. And I was Senate president, as you know, during COVID, and when our towns were being peacefully protested and burnt down all over this country. Very few or none of those folks were ever prosecuted. And President Trump said this. None of these people were prosecuted. They were not brought to justice. This was peaceful protests as large swaths of our towns were being burnt down, police officers killed, property destroyed, and openly being destroyed. Cars set on fire, flipped over, all of the things. Now, in Florida, as you know, we took a law enforcement approach on this. And we said, if you do that in Florida, you're going to spend some time in jail. So I think President Trump made a promise during his campaign that said, look, we're going to pardon this January 6th group because the injustice is being brought to them. The amount of time that's been being spent on this occasion where, law enforcement didn't get killed. We didn't burn down towns. They didn't do all of the things that had been done previously. So when we say the word lawfare, if you're applying justice the same way as that you would to all groups.
Okay, I'm going to push back a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
Okay,
this is good.
I am. I do too, sir. I love it. So there were police officers who were attacked, who have testified in front of Congress about being afraid for their lives. I think one of them lost an eye. There were some, they were protecting Congress people who were running away from, these were violent people. Some of them were violent people. We've seen the videos of it. I'm thinking of what my grandfather used to tell me, 2 wrongs don't make a right. So we didn't punish people in one instance. We do punish people in another instance. And because it's inequitable, then we take away that punishment. Does that make it right?
I'm not saying it makes 2 rights or 2 wrongs do not make a right. I guess my mom probably said that 100 times
right?
growing up. That rings very true in my ears. All I'm saying is when the Biden administration was in place, they took a view of the justice system as they will only prosecute people that they want to prosecute. They will only go after their political enemies. They will turn a blind eye to the murders that go on in this country, the bailless communities where the revolving door of people commit major crimes in our cities, much more heinous, much more heinous murders and other things alike, and there's no punishment. There's a slap on the hand. And so when you look at it through the lens of, I can go into California stores and walk out with $1,000 of materials and they can't even stop me. When you look at the amount of crimes that are going in our large cities, and then you say, oh, but the January 6th thing was heinous. Every day in this country, these large cities around this country are a heinous situation. But the liberal Biden administration, and I don't even know if liberal is the proper word, the lawless Biden administration went around and only prosecuted who they thought were conservatives committing some type of a crime. They never prosecuted these other crimes around the country that were much more heinous. So when you say 2 wrongs don't make a right, if we were trying to prosecute all of those folks as a country, but then not prosecuting any conservative activists, it would be an outrage. There'd be an outpouring and crying from the country that why are we not prosecuting these folks? And so I think we have to have a rebalance of what is justice in this country. Now, in Florida, we took a very serious approach. If you attack law enforcement in this state, your butt's going to go to jail. And I think it's important. I am a pro-law enforcement. I was a pro-law enforcement legislator. We gave them many tools, including many pay raises, including many bonuses, signing bonuses to move to Florida. Our biggest tool here in the state of Florida is to get the law enforcement to move out of these liberal states to come here to work for us, because at the time that they are defunding their law enforcement, we're increasing the benefits to our law enforcement. So I'm very proud of Florida's record on these type of issues. But the reality is when we're going to pick and choose who we prosecute based on political leanings, our country has gotten off track. And I think the last 4 years, we have seen crimes being committed all over this country in all of our large cities, and our cities are burning down. These folks were not prosecuted. These folks were not sought out. And then because of our turning our back towards what's important in this country and law and order, other things around the world fell apart, that we were not keeping our eye on the ball because we are doing political lawfare rather than what we should be doing.
Well, I appreciate you engaging in that little debate with me. And I know I'm mindful of the time, and I have a lot of I love talking to you. And so I want to get all my questions in. So I want to shift a little bit. I know that you're a very big supporter of President Trump. Before we shift to Florida politics, I wanted to ask you, were you at the inauguration?
I did not go to the inauguration after it was downsized where it was going to be inside.
Right.
I decided not to go to. I did have tickets to several of the balls, but I didn't go to that with the weather the way it was.
It was crazy.
Being able to get out of there, yes, it was really crazy.
Yeah.
So I did not go up.
Let's shift to Florida politics. You touched on it off and on while we were discussing other things, but you will very soon, I don't think you are yet, but I think you will soon be the only elected cabinet official in Florida. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Well, no, the governor is still going to be a cabinet member.
Well, isn't it the governor and cabinet? I always get confused. Is he part of the cabinet or is it the governor
Yes.
and cabinet?
There are 4 cabinet members.
Okay. All right.
Of them.
Well, you'll be one of only 2 then, because Chief Financial Officer Jimmy Patronis is running for Congress in Matt Gaetz's old seat, and former Attorney General Ashley Moody is now U.S. Senator Ashley Moody. What are your thoughts? And by the time this comes out on Sunday, it might be, this conversation might be old news, but we don't know yet who the governor is going to appoint to CFO or AG. Well, I think we know he has indicated he was going to appoint his chief of staff, James Uthmeyer, as Attorney General, but we don't know yet about the CFO. Can you give us any sneak peeks into that? And what are your thoughts about the reshaping of the cabinet?
Well, look, I think it's a unique moment in history. President Trump becomes only the second president in history to be elected twice, right, 4 years apart. And so I think that in that moment, Jimmy Patronis, which has been a friend of mine for many years, well over a decade, decided to run for Congress, doing a vacancy. If you'll remember how Jimmy Patronis got his job as CFO was Governor Scott appointed him to that position. And so he was appointed. So Jimmy Patronis would have had a 10-year career as CFO. The person that Governor DeSantis will appoint, I agree with you, it's going to be his chief of staff, James Uthmeyer. And if he does, he will have an opportunity, at least on the outset, to have a 10-year career, because he'll get these 2 years, and then he would get 2 4-year elections if he wins those elections, or if he runs for those elections. And so I think this was very common in the CFO seat. It happened the last time under Governor Scott, and obviously it's now happening again. The other one, the Attorney General seat, I don't remember a time where we appointed an Attorney General in recent history, but Ashley Moody, when she ran for the Attorney General seat 6 years ago, I think I was her first endorser, and I certainly helped on her campaign a lot and raised a lot of resources for her. I was very proud of the fact that, that if the governor had to pick someone that could represent Florida and what I believe, can run and win, that he's done a good job. But I do think that in this election cycle, President Trump, and make no mistake about this, I believe that President Trump is going to be prominent in the next set of Florida elections. And so if someone
in the midterms,
yes. And if somebody from President Trump's team runs for CFO or Attorney General or, U.S. Senate, then I think these candidates will have a very hard time returning, because I think President Trump will, if he ultimately gets involved and endorses a different candidate in this case, I think these candidates could have a tough time, raising resources and a tough time staying elected. And so I think you'll see a lot of political jockeying. And it's kind of amazing to watch how everybody, can turn on a dime and give you 9 cents change on their political leanings. And so I think you're going to see a lot of sucking up to President Trump, and we'll see where it goes. But again, that doesn't mean they're not qualified. It just means there are bigger political things at play here that are going to come into play in the next election. And I think it will take some time to reveal whether President Trump thinks these are good appointments or not.
So you mentioned the midterms. Are you going to be running for governor in the midterms in 2026?
Well, that is a great question, Dara. Right now, and I'm not trying to be political with these answers. I certainly am going to do my job as Commissioner of Agriculture. I think people get elected to offices to do a job, and they immediately look and say, what else can I do? And what else can I run for? And so I'm going to be the Commissioner of Agriculture. I'm going to run all the way through the wire. If the ideal of running for governor comes up in the next year or so, because obviously it'll all get started about a year from now, I suspect, we'll take a look at that then. Clearly, that We have a lot of friends, in Washington. I think that would be very helpful. But we serve the people of the state of Florida. I was elected to be their ag commissioner. I get up every day thinking about my job as being the commissioner of agriculture. And I think based on the results you've seen, it is very clear that we work hard every day, just as I did in the private sector. Before I come to any of the political jobs that I've had in the state Senate or this job, I built businesses here and raised my family here in the state of Florida. I'm a fifth generation Floridian. And so I did that very seriously. When I come over to the Florida Senate, I took those responsibilities very serious, and I worked very hard at it. So I'm going to continue to work hard, really, to be the Commissioner of Agriculture and do the right thing for the state of Florida. And if that adds up to something else, we'll look at that then.
Well, let me ask you the question this way. If President Trump endorses someone else, would you run against that person?
I think that President Trump is going to be very prominent in this election.
Yeah,
I do. I believe that, and I think you saw our good friend. Look, Governor DeSantis is governor today because President Trump sent out a tweet and endorsed him, right?
I know.
And
it's wild. He was really the underdog in that race against Adam Putnam, right?
Not just the underdog, right? All the polling was 60-40 for Adam Putnam. And a week later, after the endorsement come, it was 60-40 the other way. And Governor DeSantis, by the way, has done a great job. He led us through COVID. He's led us through a lot of tragedies. He handles our hurricane response very well, and we've had a very conservative government under his leadership. So I think he's done a great job. But had President Trump not have tweeted in support, he would have been something else, right?
Yeah.
He had Governor Putnam. And so, anyways, I think
and President Trump's popularity is I haven't seen numbers, but my guess would be that his popularity exceeds that of his popularity 8 years ago when or 6 years ago when he tweeted that about now Governor DeSantis.
That's right. I would agree with that, although I believe that as powerful of an endorsement as that was at that time 6 years ago. I think it would be very powerful. So again, President Trump will make a judgment. I believe he will make a judgment on that at some point in the future. And I don't know if it'll be a week from now or a year from now.
Are you in talks about that? Are you in talks about endorsement for governor with him?
I have not talked to President Trump recently about that. But I think President Trump will certainly get involved. And I think he will make a very wise choice, whatever that is. And we'll wait and see what that is.
Okay,
right?
so stay tuned.
To be determined.
Stay tuned. All right. Well, I was hoping to get you to make a little news here, so I did my best, Divas. That's all I can say.
Hey, by the way,
yes, sir.
Have made a lot of news today. We talked a lot about agriculture and how these things affect agriculture. So you are making news.
Well, I appreciate it. You're making news. I'm not making news. You're making news. And while we're on the news, how about let's talk about the special session? Again, today is Thursday as we're recording this, Thursday morning. Lots of things are changing very rapidly in Tallahassee right now. A little bit of a pause because of the snow, yes. But I wanted to ask you, you testified recently saying that you didn't think that the crackdown on immigration would affect agriculture. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so you probably know this, Dara, but when I was in Senate President office and we passed a lot of great bills during my Senate presidency, we banned, we did E-Verify bills, we did sanctuary city bans, we did many things to let people illegally come into our country at that time know that maybe Florida is not the place you want to come. So we did, Governor DeSantis talks about shipping some illegals to Martha's Vineyard. It was under my presidency that we gave him the money and the authority to be able to do that. And so we did a lot of things to deter illegals coming into this state, which, by the way, in the last 4 years have been primarily, there's been a lot of criminals and a lot of gangs and a lot of drugs that's coming across that south border. And we have done everything we can as a state, I believe, to help prevent that from coming here. And also, we've sent law enforcement to the border, right, to help Texas with the border crisis at their command. So I think that two things have to happen at the same time. I think number one, President Trump is doing an amazing job shutting that border down. You've seen it already.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're sending troops, we're getting the wall reconstruction going again. We're doing all the things to protect our southern border, the stay in Mexico policy, all of those things. And he's being very effective, as you would expect President Trump to do. I think part two of that is the deportation that's going to start happening. Our state law enforcement has got illegals in every jail probably in this state. And I'm guessing that I don't have a record of those things, but there are people that are illegally here in jails all across the state. We now can have those illegals deported back to their country. People that are occupying, and we've not really seen this in Florida, but you've seen it in other states, occupying entire buildings. That the Biden administration came in and took all of these apartment buildings or hotel buildings and things about that. And I've talked about the secondary crisis that led to was affordable housing. When you house 10 million illegal people in this country, they are being housed in housing that could go to Americans. And it's kind of like, why would we allow us to have such a crisis of affordable housing by all of the illegals that are coming in this country also? So I think that the second part of the deportation and shutting the wall down, which has to happen as President Trump has prescribed, is you've got to have an H-2A program to allow legal labor to come to our farming communities and reside and to be able to do this labor. And let me go one more step further. There's been a bill that's been vetoed here in the state of Florida to allow farmers to build H-2A housing on their sites. This is a federal program. There's federal guidelines, all the things, and the governor's vetoed it. Last year in his veto pen, he said that his concern was that housing would eventually be used for illegals being here in the state of Florida. So I know the bill sponsor, Senator Collins, which is a close ally of Governor DeSantis and first Green Beret and elected to the Florida Senate, he has refiled that bill this year, and I hope he will put some penalties in the bill to satisfy Governor DeSantis' issues. Because when the H-2A labor comes to Florida seasonally to work on our farms and pick crops and things of that nature, they take up a lot of affordable housing for the rest of our citizens. So if we can allow those farmers to have their H-2A programs and make sure that they are not housing illegal labor in these houses, just have the legal H-2A program, then we can really solve a lot of problems. We can have affordable food, which we all require, and inflation has ravaged us the last 4 years, and including in the food industry. And so we can have more affordable food if we do this. We can have more affordable housing. So we can do a lot of things that rights a lot of wrongs that are currently in our system by allowing housing to come in and getting people that are here illegally out, so that we have this free up this housing for Floridians and in Americans all across the country will be able to have that extra housing, which will help drive down the costs, by the way, which will help drive down inflation. And so there's nothing in my mind that's magical about this. It's all common sense. I've talked about common sense a lot in the last 10 years when I served in the legislature and now as Commissioner of Agriculture. And these things are common sense things that we can do to make our food more affordable, our housing more affordable, and our streets safer.
So note to Governor DeSantis, don't veto that H-2A housing bill this year.
I hope he does not veto it. And I hope that, Senator Collins will put some penalties in there that if farmers do try to use this for illegals, because that was the concern Governor DeSantis said he had. And by the way, I think that's a legitimate concern. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So I think if we make the penalties harsh enough for people who would do that, then I think maybe we can get that bill signed. And by the way, that will bring relief nearly immediately to our housing crisis here in the state of Florida. Because again, we would be housing the H-2A workers on the farms where they're working, not in housing around the communities of which they're working.
You've been presiding officer. Were you surprised to see the way the special session was called and the response from the legislative leaders?
So as a presiding officer, these things are normally worked out ahead of time. There's normally a coordination between the two presiding officers and the governor. The legislature generally calls those special sessions. And so I think that I don't know all the details precisely of how this went down. Based on what the response was from the presiding officers, clearly I do not believe they were in the loop as Governor DeSantis called a special session. And I think what happens is when you look at the issues that Governor DeSantis has brought forth, nobody disagrees with these policies. There's not, you know how conservative our legislature is. And so nobody disagrees with the policies. I think that the disagreement is can we do this in that short a time frame and get it right? Can we, in a course of a week or 10 days, can we put together this very sophisticated legislation? And, if you say, well, sure you can, they can work day and night and get these things done. And certainly they can. But when this special session was called, there wasn't a 3 or 4 day work stoppage based on snow and ice on the ground.
Right.
And so, so when you think about the position that they've been put in, clearly the Capitol's been shut down several days. And I think even today, from workers coming in and our teams and staff to be able to do this work. So I think that the policy will all get satisfied. It may be in the coming weeks and certainly in the coming months it will. I think timing is going to be an issue. Now, we can say, well, and I love this part, that we want to be very aggressive in Florida to help President Trump achieve his goals. We certainly do. We have done many things over the last 3 or 4 years to help already accomplish those goals. So the state of Florida is prepared to help President Trump any way we see fit. The issues that Governor DeSantis brings up are, again, very important issues, very valid issues. I think timing is the issue. It has nothing to do with the policy. And so I think this will get resolved. We've got, our legislature, think about this, for the last 25 years, we've been controlled by conservative leadership. And you can say, well, varying stages depend on who the leaders were, but we've had conservative leadership in this state in the last 15 years, starting with Governor Scott. We've paid down more than half of our debt. We balance the budget every year, which is required in our Constitution. But not only do we do that, we've got over $20 billion of reserves. This is a very conservative legislature. It's been very conservative, not only during Governor DeSantis' time, but prior to him being there. They set up for a lot of the rewards that we're being rewarded with today from these fiscal conservative policies happened before he got there. And he has, by the way, been a champion of continuing them. In other words, we have not taken our foot off the gas pedal on these issues. They're going to resolve the issues that were brought up in the call for the special session one way or the other. It's a timing issue. And so I think their disputing is over time, not policy.
I got you. I agree 100%. And for what it's worth, I have two things, but I know we're running out of time, and I really do appreciate you joining me this morning. I want to ask you a fun question before we run out of time, and then a serious question. The fun question is, what's on your legislative bingo card? You have 3 things on your legislative bingo card. What would they be?
This year, we certainly want to continue the success of the past. As Senate President, you know this, I champion the wildlife corridor. I believe it's it's got to be one of the centerpieces of a successful state. If we're going to have a successful state 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now, we've got to protect that wildlife corridor. By the way, Dara, the wildlife corridor, Google a map of the state of Florida at nighttime. You're going to see all the beautiful lights. Everywhere it's dark on that map is a wildlife corridor, in my opinion. Everywhere it's dark is where animals traverse the state. It's where our aquifer gets recharged, and it's where we grow your food. I think that this year we're going to ask the legislature for additional resources for our Rural and Family Lands Act, which, by the way, buys development rights substantially. Over 90% of it is in that wildlife corridor. I think that's number one. We're going to continue to update our BMP manuals are going to be all updated from the previous 2 years. So they haven't been updated in over a decade, maybe 20 years. And we're going to have all of our BMP manuals updated here in the next couple of months, which will give farmers the blueprint of how to protect their land using best management practices.
I was just going to ask you, BMP, best management practices.
That's right. And what we're doing there with that is we're making sure that we have reduced water usage in farming in some cases from 40 to 80%.
Wow.
And to be able to, in the last 25 years, using best management practices. Of course, now you see a lot of AI, artificial intelligence coming in also. But what we've used as artificial intelligence the last 25 years is best management practices. So we've been doing these things. We've reduced our water needs. We've reduced our nutrient loads. We're doing all of the things so that farmers are still considered the first environmentalists of this state. And they should be, and we are. And so I think we're going to continue to push that. And we're going to continue to push common sense policies this year, just as we've done in the past. And I'll give you a few examples. We were the first state in the union to ban synthetic meat, fake meat. We're very proud of that. We do not want our consumers eating things that we do not know is safe for them. And we certainly do not want to destroy an entire industry in our beef industry. Some science experiment, from the Biden administration. Our FFA and 4-H kids, now if they have sanctioned events for FFA and Future Farmers of America or 4-H, they get excused absences from schools. So in the last 4 years, we went from 30,000 school kids enrolled in FFA to over 60,000. And because of the additional resources the state has put in, we're going to continue to expand opportunities for our young Americans, our school at K-12 system, to be able to engage in agriculture, understand agriculture. And I think that's a big part of the future. So I think we're going to keep engaging on the things that will make us better, not just today, but make us better over the coming decades. And that's the way I look at this, is how do we ensure that we have the most safe, affordable, abundant food, not just today, but 10 years from now, 50 years from now. And these are programs that we're going to really look forward to continuing to push this year.
That kind of leads me into what I was going to close on, except for a question about raw milk. But before we get to end on raw milk, you've been ag commissioner for 2 years. You mentioned some of the what you've accomplished when we were talking about the resourcing and activities you've been doing around fire prevention and the Rural and Family Lands Program. But your biggest accomplishments, if you have time, if you wanted to elaborate on some of those for us.
I'll go down the list of just the ones that come top to mind. When I took over this office, we had about 60,000 acres protected in our Rural and Family Lands Program, which is where we buy development rights. That property will never be developed in perpetuity. Today, we have over 195,000 acres. We've over the previous 20 years, we did 60,000 acres, and in the last 2 years, we went from 60 to 190,000. So more than
we
double. Nearly tripled the program.
Right.
That's exactly right. And so we're very, very proud of that. I can't stress that enough. Fresh from Florida. So if you want to defend ourselves against really bad foreign policy agreements with other countries on food and what can be imported in this country, Fresh from Florida, we went from about 500,000 followers on our social media when I took over 2 years ago. Today, we're over 1.2 million followers.
Wow.
And we are really pushing the envelope with the Fresh from Florida products. And again, it all sets those bad trade agreements, because if you go in the store and there's watermelons or strawberries or vegetables or anything from another state or another country, but then you have Florida grown products there, buy the Florida products. That's helping our farmers. And Fresh from Florida, and Susie's done a great job, Susie McKinley's done a great job with that program, and Kathy Mears, as you know, leading these things. We are very proud of the gains we've made with Fresh from Florida. And I'll mention one more, because I'll mention two more. The loan program that we put in place after Idalia, the loan/grant program, when Hurricane Idalia come through, we put a program in to bring immediate relief for farmers having to clear their land or rebuild buildings. 0% interest loan. A portion of that can be grant if they can continue to comply with all the programs necessary means. That has put hundreds of small farmers back on the road to recovery in real time, not 2 years later, not 3 years later, or 5 years later, like the federal government does. In real time, we did those things. I was very, very proud of that. And the last one I'll mention, last year, year before last, we got permission to make sure that hemp folks could not go after our children. They cannot package their hemp in a way that would be attractive to children.
Right.
We have taken well over 1 million packages off the shelves of the state of Florida. We've shut down some of those companies, and we're very proud of we have finally, when I say finally, starting 6 months ago, 8 months ago, we started seeing fewer and fewer kids showing up at emergency rooms, bringing this product to schools and sharing it. So we know our efforts to get rid of these things, you know what they look like, Dara? They look like Skittles and gummy worms.
Yeah, I know what they look like, and I see the marketing, and I see the Jolly Rancher slushies. And this is called hemp, but this stuff will get you loopy. I mean, it'll make you high. So it's being sold all over the place.
Right? That's right. And we, the Department of Agriculture, and our team, our consumer services team, have went and rounded up well over 1 million packages. We've shut the manufacturing down. We've done a lot of things to protect our children. And I think when you look back at the last 2 years and you think, what was our goals when we got there? All of these were. And again, I can't stress it enough. We want the safe, most affordable, and most abundant food supply. And the state of Florida, with my leadership and the leadership team that I have assembled there, and what a valuable member Kathy Mears is to manage all this, as the Assistant Commissioner of Agriculture, by the way. We're very blessed to have her in that position. She has done a tremendous job executing these plans and making sure that we are not letting anything drop, because we're doing all of these things at the same time. And it's been a tremendous honor to serve as Commissioner of Agriculture. You never thought a young man from Trilby, Florida, that was, in the egg business, would have been able to be a Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Florida. And it's been such an honor to do this job. And again, every day we get up, that is our concern. How do we protect farmers? How do we make sure that farmers have the tools they need? The snow and ice that you see coming now, we're going to be with those farmers. We're going to have programs to help get them back on their feet as quick as possible. And we're going to do it in a way that advantages agriculture, so that we can make sure that we maintain those small farms in that supply chain and do our part, for this country to make sure we do that.
In your role as Agriculture Commissioner over the past 2 years, what's been the biggest surprise?
I think the biggest surprise is that when I first came in, of course, I have a lot of ambition, right? We wanted to make sure our forestry was, had all the equipment they needed, and the training and the leadership to say, hey, go do your jobs, and do your jobs very proudly. Our ag law enforcement, go do your jobs, do them proudly. In other words, be bold. And I always tell my people there that all of our people say, look, guys, when you do a tremendous job that they do every day, we're going to reward them. We're going to recognize them for doing a tremendous job. We're going to go out and say, hey, look, you guys, not only did you do a tremendous job, you've saved lives here today. You've made the state of Florida a better place. Our people are weights and measures that are going out and making sure consumers are taken care of. Our licensing division, you can get a license. If you want your concealed carry license, you can get it in less than a week, and we're making it easier and easier. So we're doing everything to be a friendly customer service organization. And I think when I first got here, we were saying these were the things that we were going to do. As you can imagine, me coming in new. And I think that a lot of our divisions, a lot of our people would think, well, that's what everybody says. Everybody says they're going to make it easier for consumers. We're going to protect consumers. I think that within just a few months, I would say that we have probably nearly 100% participation in that vision. How do we offer better service? How do we take products that are dangerous for kids out of the markets? How do we protect our forests in the state? How do we prevent a wildfire from spreading into the big one? How do we manage our law enforcement, our interdiction stations as they come in? Colonel Adams has done a tremendous job with that organization the last 2 years, with the training and the things. And by the way, Darren, you never hear this, but when we first got there, we had double digit, I think nearly 20% vacancies average around the divisions. And today we have around 7%. In other words, we have filled these positions. And by the way, when we advertise a job now, we will get 25 or 30 applicants to a job. When I first got here 2 years ago, nobody would apply, or one person or two maybe, or none. And because of the morale boost, because of us turning our troops loose, whichever division they're in, and these people are doing these leaders of all of these divisions are doing a tremendous job. But our boots on the ground is unprecedented where we've come from in 2 years. And by the way, I'm very proud to say these things. Talk to any of our division managers, talk to any of our the guys and gals on the ground, and you'll see that the morale boost that the department has had. So what I am most proud of is, I believe, just putting wind behind the sails of everybody that works at the Department of Agriculture to be able to go out and vigorously do their jobs. And like I told them, I said, ladies and gentlemen, if there's a mistake made, because we're humans, we're going to make mistakes. Guess what? I'm going to take credit for the mistakes. I'm the Commissioner of Agriculture. If you make mistakes, I am telling you to do your job very aggressively. I'm telling you to do it safe and go home at night, but do it very aggressively, because that's what I was elected to get done. And I'm willing to accept the downside of that. I'm willing to accept if we make mistakes because we're moving too fast. That's my prerogative. But our people are doing an amazing job, and I'm proud. And you may not know this, but I have visited almost all of our people in this.
No, I didn't know that.
Department. There's nearly 4,000 people. Yeah, I immediately started visiting our divisions around the state. I believe I've met almost all the people that work here, and there's about 4,000. And so I'm very proud of that. And we're going to continue to visit. And that's where I learn things. When I'm out in the field with our people, that's where we learn where we're going in the future.
Well, I did lie. I said that was the last question, and I forgot that I had teased to the raw milk. So raw milk, is that a thing? Yay or nay?
Raw milk is one of those things that I always put in the category of, if Americans want raw milk, if Floridians want raw milk, they certainly should have access to it. They certainly can raise their family the way that they choose to do so. Just like, as Senate President, we had the largest expansion of school choice in the history of the country, because I believe parents should raise their children. I believe parents should determine the education of their children. I believe that Floridians, Americans, should be able to determine what type of milk they want to drink. I think it's very important to have the labels to tell them the warnings of.
Would you drink it?
I have drunk.
You have
raw milk. But growing up, I grew up, we were very poor when I was growing up as a young man. And, we had goats, and it would not be unlikely we'd go out and milk goats and have goat milk, raw cow milk, any of those things. I grew up in, I was born in Lakeland, then we moved to Plant City, and I lived to Plant City till I was about 12 years old, and then we moved to Dade City or Trilby. And so when we were kids, we were very fortunate to have goat milk. We were very important. That's all we had. So, it was not a matter of if that's what you want or not. That's what we did. And again, we never did without anything growing up. My parents I was adopted, as you know, when I was 5 by my mom.
Yeah.
And so we never did without. We had clothes on our back. We had food in our belly. And we worked very hard every day. And that's what we continue to do. And if people want to drink raw milk, that is their prerogative, and God bless them. And in some cases, it's medicinal for some people, and they believe that, and that's what they want. So I believe in allowing Americans to do what they want to do with their body and their children. And I do believe that it's important to understand the downsides of any of these things that we do. And Americans do. I've got confidence that Americans do know those things, and they choose to feed or raise their families the way they want to, and I'm all for that.
Well, thank you so much. You're Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Wilton Simpson. Wonderful to have you on the show. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I hope you come back again soon.
We certainly will, Dara. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. hosted by News Service senior writer Dara Cam, and produced by me, Mike Exline. Music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC.